What I'm about to show you is inappropriate for people under the age of 18. I'm just kidding. That's two gay people holding hands. But that's how LGBTQ representation is treated in not only this country, but around the globe. Today, in my speech, I will explain the disparity between queer representation and straight representation, how this disparity affects kids who watch this media, and the solutions for fixing this problem. But I'm also going to address the arguments against increasing LGBTQ representation. Before I get into it, I want to address some terminology. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer/questioning. Even though LGBTQ, queer, and gay refer to different things, I'm going to be using the terms interchangeably just to make it less redundant. For my first point, I'm going to compare the numbers between queer representation and straight representation. In a 2024 GLAAD report, only 8.6% of characters during primetime broadcasting shows were LGBTQ. This meager number is divided up by different sexualities within the community, such as gay, bisexual, asexual, and pansexual. Meanwhile, the remaining 91.4% was just straight characters. You might be wondering, well, I only know one or two gay people, so how does this matter? Well, the truth is, according to a survey conducted in 26 countries by the market research company Ipsos, about 39% of the world's population are anything but straight and cisgender. So there's about a 30% disparity between what we see on TV and what's actually happening in the real world. And sure, TV is mostly made for us to escape reality, but that usually doesn't mean escaping the reality that an entire group of people doesn't exist, unless the debate is about LGBTQ or people of color. So basically, kids who already feel alone in their sexuality are less likely to have a positive role model they can look to when they're watching TV or movies. For my second point, I'm going to dive into how this disparity affects queer children. The Trevor Project, an organization that conducts research, advocates, and educates on behalf of the LGBTQ community, found in a 2024 poll that 49% of queer teens experienced bullying within the last year, and 39% of queer teens and young adults had suicidal ideation within the same time period. This lack of queer representation also means a lack of appropriate coping mechanisms to deal with bullying. For example, I was bullied in 5th grade for acting too feminine, and I never really dealt with the emotions that were a result of that situation since I really didn't know how to. The only gay characters I knew of growing up were Oscar from The Office, along with Carol and Susan from Friends. I mean, what's a gay kid supposed to learn about their sexuality from side characters? And would you rather your child learn about safe sex from, Reddit, or from an age-appropriate TV show that you put on for them? I only ask you that question because these days, it's so much easier for kids to access information from either unreliable sources or from sources that just aren't age appropriate for them. A movie that really drives this point home is Yes, God, Yes, a 2019 movie directed by Karen Maine. In Yes, God, Yes, Alice, the main character, stumbles upon a chat room, and things get a little steamy, except she's a minor in high school and she's chatting with seemingly a really old man. And in my personal life, I've had to play catch up with queer media within the last 2 years because there was such a lack of it in my early teens. So not only would a bigger selection of LGBTQ media help kids to understand the differences between them and their peers, but it would also allow straight people to learn how to approach people from the community in a respectful manner. My third point is, well, what are we supposed to do to increase queer representation? Well, let's look back at that GLAAD report I mentioned earlier. In this report, it suggested that cable networks, along with online streaming platforms, increase funding for shows that are long-running and put queer representation front and center. There also needs to be an increase of queer characters of color, since, according to GLAAD, the majority representation is gay white men, which can get a little tiring if you're looking for something new. Something I personally would suggest is to stop putting queer characters into boxes or stereotypes that really aren't true. In his book, Straight Girls and Queer Guys by Christopher Pullen, an associate professor from Bournemouth University, dives deep into the stereotypical fag-hag relationships we see in media. Pullen gives an example of the overplayed gay best friend trope from the movie My Best Friend's Wedding. He writes, "The gay best friend is represented as an unwilling accomplice, highlighting the straight female's unrealistic obsession." So there needs to be an increase of funding for queer representation that's not only written by queer people, but, for queer people. Finally, for my fourth point, I'm going to address the opposing arguments of why we actually shouldn't increase queer representation and maybe we shouldn't have it at all. One of the reasons we've yet to see an increase of queer representation is because there are still many people who see it as unnatural because, well, gay people in a gay relationship can't naturally procreate. Or there are people that see gay relationships as sinful, even though no one really chooses their sexuality. I mean, when did you choose to be straight? I never woke up one day and just decided I wanted my life to be harder because being gay sounds really fun. Brett Cooper, a conservative commentary YouTuber, has made multiple videos complaining about queer content made for kids. In one of these videos, titled YouTube Fix This Now, Cooper says, "You don't get to talk about your sex life in front of children and have it be okay. That's weird." She went on to say that if you could just keep it away from children, we would have never had to deal with this. I understand Cooper's frustration. Kids should not have access to media or books that are inappropriate for their age. However, the videos that Cooper are referencing are ones that just explain different sexuality in terms that kids will understand. They aren't tutorials on how to have gay sex as a minor. Pastor Mark Sims from Kennewick, Washington has a different approach and concludes that Christian parents should teach their children about sex and sexuality instead of leaving it up for schools or media companies. Sims says, "Teach them that all people are made in the image of God and deserve our love and respect, including the people around us who are currently not walking with Jesus, even as we pray for and plead with them to come to King Jesus." While his perspective is much more respectable than Cooper's, it still ignores the fact that Christian kids can be gay and that praying the gay away doesn't work. And so treating gay people as a group of others is really not a great approach. The truth is, Cooper's problem with queer representation for kids isn't that it's all inappropriate, it's that she relies on a deep level of homophobia to distinguish what's appropriate for kids to watch and what isn't. Because if she wasn't homophobic and just didn't like the current state of queer representation, she would give constructive criticism on how we could improve. Instead, she tries to say that all queer representation are just creepy adults trying to explain their sex lives to kids, when that simply isn't the case. So instead of sending this video to someone else and wanted to recite the arguments I made, here's what you would need to remember. First, there's a huge gap between the queer representation we see on screen and the amount of queer people out in the world. Second, this disparity makes queer kids feel alone in their sexuality and suffer from mental illness at a rate that they shouldn't be. And third, parents and companies need to provide education for kids about respecting and understanding the LGBTQ community, even if they don't necessarily agree with it. That's been my advocacy speech, and thank you so much for your time.